My name is Jason J. Rock Houston, and my co-host today, as always, for Remembering Woodstock is Vince Lupo, who is a drummer from the Los Angeles-based Rolling Stones tribute band, Mick Adams and the Stones. Welcome back to Remembering Woodstock, Vince. And today we're going to be talking one of, I know your all-time favorite bands, Jefferson Airplane. And throughout our Remembering Woodstock series, you shared with me that was probably one of the bands you actually got to see live at Woodstock, and to this day, they've had an everlasting influence on you.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me once again.
Yeah.
Appreciate that very much. Yeah, as we go back, we had just gotten there. We had just gotten there at that time of the day, about 5 a.m. We got to the site right about 6. They were just getting on stage.
Wow.
And I happened to go online and look at the video of the very first song that they did, which was The Other Side of This Life.
Yeah.
And just as they had started with that, people were starting to crash on the stage.
Wow.
And a little hell broke loose with Hell's Angels beating guys up. And it was just chilling. Like, you have to understand that with so many years passing, I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, wow.
Very, very vague. But watching it on film, I had seen that before on film, and it's like, oh, man.
I was there. yeah, I lived that.
If anything could have gone wrong, there it was.
Yeah.
But they came through it, and they played there about 45 minutes from what I remember.
And this is a time when they're very young in their career, really in their infancy back in 1969. I mean, and what's interesting is probably a lot of people like me, when you think of Jefferson Airplane, maybe you've heard White Rabbit, maybe you've heard Somebody to Love, but they got a lot of other, great hits. And interesting enough, I was looking at the set list they played at Woodstock that day, and there's and you would share with me that one of your favorite Jefferson Airplane, probably your favorite album by them, is the album Surrealistic Pillow. And oddly enough, a lot of those songs are played that day at Woodstock.
There was about 4 or 5 from that album, 3 or 4 actually. I'm looking at the set list right now.
Yeah.
Also, 2 or 3 from an album that was just going to come out that October, Volunteers.
Wow.
Crown of Creation was in there somewhere in '68. That album had come out. And before that was After Bathing at Baxter's. That was in '66. The band actually got off the ground in '65. Their first album was called Jefferson Airplane Take Off, I believe it was.
Oh, wow, that's cool. I wasn't aware of that. But okay, thanks for educating us on that.
From what I remember, it was Marty Balin started finding guys. He had originally gotten signed to something and recorded a couple of things and didn't do anything.
Wow.
But after the Beatles came out, he wanted to get more into that folk rock. So he was really on the cutting edge of the folk rock, and the first album was more of a folk rock album.
Wow.
And he found Kantner, and Kantner found Kukkonen. Kukkonen brought in Jack Cassidy a little later on.
Wow.
Kantner then met up with Grace Slick. They had a drummer before Spencer Dryden, so he was the last guy in.
Okay.
Dryden. So they had been a band since probably later '65 to when they had gotten on stage about 3.5 years.
Wow.
As being a band. And it was just interesting that the Volunteers album had not come out
just yet.
2 months later.
Wow.
Right. And on their set list from Woodstock, they had done Wooden Ships, which of course was the Crosby, Stills and Nash cover.
Yeah.
Which got covered on that album, along with the song Volunteers. And so they did an Eskimo Blue Day. They did that song as well, which is off of the Volunteers. Other Side of This Life, they opened up with, as I said. Then they went to Somebody to Love. And I'm going to tell you, after 51 years, I have vague memories of the set list. Somebody to Love, of course. 3/5 of a Mile in 10 Seconds. Yeah. I knew that one. Plastic Fantastic Lover, because it was Surrealistic Pillow.
Yeah.
And The Ballad of You and Me and Plumio. And White Rabbit and Come Back Baby. Those were all songs that were done at Woodstock that I was familiar with. So it was nice to hear songs that you were familiar with. You know?
And what's interesting is I was listening to the Surrealistic Pillow today in preparation for this, and you can tell this was music that came like from the '60s or '70s, but more than likely the '60s. If you know nothing about Jefferson Airplane, it was music for that time, if you will. But I will tell you this: all the songs on that album, they're very unique. They stand out on their own, and one of my favorite tracks off that is actually "Come Back Baby," which you just mentioned, and part of the reason to me is it's one of the more rockier tunes. It's almost got a hard rock feel to it. It's probably one of the songs that really stand out on its own and sounds the most different from everything else on there.
It's because it's to me that's a real blues song.
Yeah.
It's a blues rock song, and also I believe it's Paul Kantner that's singing. So the voice it threw me the first time. I was like, that's not Alan, that's not Grace, obviously.
Yeah.
And a little tidbit about the title of the album was Jerry Garcia was like their ghost producer at the time. And when he heard the album, he said, before it was released, he said it sounded like it was surrealistic, like it was on a pillow. So they named it because he inadvertently named it.
You know, it's funny you bring that up, because I remember when you were sharing with me that this was your favorite album by Jefferson Airplane.
Oh yeah.
My response was, Vince, I'm going to check the album out, but I don't know what a Surrealistic Pillow is, but just that name, it got my attention. I wanna. It makes me want to check it out. Like what is
very much a psychedelic title.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, it's like what
and
is
when
that?
you listen to the music, you go, "Whoa!"
It is
they're
kind
a
of
jam
surrealistic,
band, but they're not a jam band.
Yeah. I mean,
they're pop music, but it kind of wasn't. They're very interesting, real groundbreaking.
Yeah, another song you kind of turned me on to. You told me the last time we were discussing this. You said, when you check out that album, check out the song "Today." That's just such a great song. Oh. And I can't agree more because first of all, I'll tell you, I was reading I checked this stuff out on YouTube, like a lot of people do, and I was reading some of the comments, and there's some guy on there that said, this song it means different things to different people depending on your mood and what day of the week it is and all that, and that is so true. I mean, there was one guy that posted stuff about having cancer and kind of beating it, and he's like, I beat the cancer, today is a much better day than yesterday. And it's kind of interesting that people can interpret, this one song, for example, so differently. And today, I don't know how to describe it. To me, I would kind of describe it as kind of a trippy kind of track. It's not real fast. It's not real upbeat. It's kind of slow. It's trippy, I would say, is a good word to describe it.
Absolutely. And that song goes into that other one, Coming Back to Me.
Yeah.
What a beautiful tune that is. So while the rest of the album rocks, these two tunes just kind of, they center you for
It's almost like mood music.
You listen.
Mood music or to meditate. Yeah.
Absolutely. And boy, oh boy, that was the day before I was into any mind-altering substances.
Yeah, but
I could see how had you been on them at the time.
I'm with you there. I never did a drug or anything in my life, but I tell you, it took me there. It's, okay, I can understand what you must feel like. Okay.
Right, exactly. You could see if you were on acid or just on a really anything like that, mind-altering, that the album can take you someplace.
Yeah.
Some sort of astral plane. I'm out there somewhere,
Yeah.
Oh, they're fun, and they were interesting, groundbreaking band.
Yeah.
They had their heartaches,
obviously,
and struggles, and of course, Balance no longer with us, and such. But they were fun. I remember their being electric. When they were on stage, to me, it made me feel alive and electrified.
Well, that's interesting. So you mean like, because I've often been said, if I go to see a band live, I want to be entertained. I want to have ultimate show. Because if I want to just listen to the record, I can stay home and do that. But
that's right.
But that's so interesting. So like, again, I'd imagine if they'd done a song with, say, like Today, it would have rocked a lot harder performing it live than on the studio album,
Right. Now, going through that set list, there was nothing that was really downbeat like that.
Yeah.
But and these songs, they were meant to drive the audience. If you did a ballad in the middle of a rock set,
I hear you.
Like they had, it would really suck the wind out of the crowd.
Yeah, it's so true. Now, I got to ask you, because just looking at the set list here that we've been discussing, I mean, and even look at some of the titles, like on Surrealistic Pillow album, I mean, just the song titles alone, a lot of them, there's kind of like a patriotic theme running through them. Like one song they played that day that I checked it out, and I said, oh, that's a cool, kind of interesting song, Uncle Sam Blues.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, that was a Hot Tuna cover. Yeah. So later on, 71, I think it was, Cassidy and Kekkonen split off from them, and Marty Ballin, Grace, and Kantner stayed together. So the band kind of just split in two, and they put that song together, those two guys.
Wow.
For Hot Tuna. So that's really
where that came
a Hot Tuna song.
I got to check out the original just to kind of compare the two later. But another track that I thought was kind of cool here is "Won't You Try Saturday Afternoon."
You know what? An interesting song, and that was one of the ones that I have the vaguest recollection of that particular one. Everything else is far, far more familiar to me from prior years, and knowing the Volunteers album, not knowing what the songs were at the time, but knowing them now.
I mean, you'd almost have to be on something. I mean, I'll tell you, just a song title alone that really stands out to me. A great song title, "Plastic Fantastic Lover."
Oh, what a great tune. Marty Ballin tune. And that's a Surrealistic Pillow song.
I mean, and again, that's one of those things that haven't even heard the tune yet, but that title, it makes. I'm going to go and hear that. I want to know what that's about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Some good stuff. 3/5 of a Mile. That song, when I first heard that, I was like, "What the heck is this about?"
Yeah.
But boy, that thing does motor along at 3/5 of a mile in 10 seconds speed.
It's kind of an interesting tune because, I mean, it definitely gets your attention one way or another, and it's one of the more interesting songs on that album, Surrealistic Pillow. But like another track I like off that album is She Has Funny Cars. I mean, I mean, that's kind of trippy too. And for one thing, it's like, most times when you're listening to rock music, it's guys talking about their love for cars, but this, like, she has, kind of funny, interesting cars. It's like, okay, what's that about?
There's a few things I love. I love how the drums start off on that song. And then it goes into that swing beat. It's really interesting how they blended a rock feel with a swing feel.
Yeah, I was trying to... again, you got your pulse right on it, Vince. When I listened to that track today, I was trying to think, okay, how could I describe this? And that's kind of that's the best, almost a swing kind of feel to it. Yeah,
that's what that is.
Yeah.
That's a swing beat, and not that many drummers play swing.
How about you? Have you ever played that?
Oh, heck yeah! And I started off swing drumming before and with rock and roll way back in the beginning, because my first drummer that I looked up to as a child was Gene Krupa.
Oh wow, he's a real wild guy. Yeah, I have seen videos of him.
Absolutely, and that's that real big band swing, and that's what got me going was him. And then when the Beatles came, it was that rock beat. But I've been able to do a lot of different styles through my life.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean a thing. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because another drummer I'm sure you're aware of is Carmine Appice, and he's like he's a real powerhouse drummer, and I know he cited Gene Krupa as one of his main influences. And a lot of times, like even guys like Charlie Watts and Peter Criss, the drummer from Kiss, a lot of these guys started out as jazz musicians before they ever got into rock music.
Well, Charlie's still love is jazz, and he is a jazz swing player before he ever played rock and roll. And part of what makes Charlie interesting is that when he plays, he had to invent playing his version of rock and roll.
Wow, very, very
because
interesting.
Because he was a jazz player.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? He had to reinvent himself to be in that band.
Yeah. And since since we're talking about Woodstock and Jefferson Airplane and Surrealistic Pillow album, one song we cannot talk about this band without mentioning, of course, is "Somebody to Love." And I bring that up because even almost 50 years later, Vince, that's probably the song that when people hear the name Jefferson, that's the first probably one of the first songs, that and White Rabbit, that people think of.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's those two songs that you think of, and that album was a gold, certified gold.
Wow.
Sold 1 million.
Yeah.
Actually, platinum, sorry. Sold 1 million copies. And those two songs, I think they both reached #1.
I'm sure they did.
Time.
Yeah, and even all these years later, who knows, because it's still being played on the radio. And
I do remember being on the beach as a 16-year-old, listening to that stuff and just going, wow, this stuff
again, songs like that, they get in our head and they become like part of a soundtrack to our lives. But let me ask you, why some of the other great tunes on this album do you think, and throughout the entire band's catalog, don't get played on the radio as much?
Well, because that's the way radio
works.
Is. Back in the day, and way back in the day, we had, as I said earlier on another one of our sessions, a radio station called WNEW from New York. Was a flagship station, became a rock station. They were an album-oriented rock.
Okay.
AOR.
That's what that stands for.
They just didn't play hits. They played album sides. They played deep cuts. Things like that. So when we bring an album home, because we hear 1 or 2 tunes off of it, then you'd want to throw an album away because I don't like the rest of these. But that radio station, and specifically, would play so many more, and you go, I think I like this. I'm going to take it, go out and get the rest of this record. And you could just tell when you listen to this record that it was what's that word? Groundbreaking. It was new at the time. They were almost like a new wave band on their own.
I will agree with that for the simple fact that 1969, when this Woodstock event went on, I was not even alive yet, but I will tell you, just from being a music fan over the years, Jefferson Airplane, like listening to the songs off of this album we're talking about, Surrealistic Pillow, when you listen to a band for the first time, or you listen to an album like this for the first time, you're trying to think, who do these guys sound like? And I can honestly say, they got a great original, fresh sound in the sense, even 50 years later, listening to this for the first time, because, I've heard like Somebody to Love a million times. I was aware of that. A lot of the stuff I'd never heard of before, and each tune kind of stands out on its own. I could see all these tunes kind of fitting on this album, but they really didn't sound like any whoever they were influenced by. It sounds like, this band's got kind of a trippy sound, but it's original.
Right, it was more of itself. They were all, for people who don't know this, I don't know who wouldn't anymore.
They
were part of that Bay,
area.
San Francisco Bay sound with the Dead and Quicksilver, them, many others. And Jerry Garcia seemed to be the linchpin of all of these things.
And I could see you saying he was working with these guys, but yet they didn't sound exactly like the Grateful Dead. They had their own kind of sound but you could tell it was music for that time,
Right. They were even more trippy than the Dead.
Which is amazing when you think about it.
In that way. And the fact that I read about this particular album, can you imagine making an album of that quality in under 2 weeks for $8,000?
Yeah. Now going a little further back in time before Woodstock, obviously you were a fan of Jefferson Starship before you saw them at Woodstock. So let's now go to the part of the story where you share with us how you first got turned on to this band, even before Woodstock.
Oh, well, part of it was the radio,
yeah.
Somebody to Love, hearing Somebody to Love on AM.
Oh yeah.
Listen, folks, we had AM radio back in the day. We had transistors, and it was great.
It's pre-internet.
We loved it. We loved. So hearing these songs for the first time, and identifying them as something that was new, fresh.
Yeah.
That's what sold me was this one song, and then you hear White Rabbit, which I believe was the follow-up.
Yeah.
Because had that been the lead track, I don't know if they would have. I mean, the lead hit.
Yeah.
I don't know. They had to build their reputation with a more pop song, and that's where Somebody to Love comes in. They're powerful.
And another tune I was really digging today, listening to this, is "How Do You Feel."
Oh yeah, just really, really great stuff. Fresh, rock.
I mean, I could see
folk.
opening a show with that. How do you feel?
Oh sure. I know that they opened up some of their shows with 3/5 of a mile.
Yeah.
But boy, what a great catalog of songs, and they were only together until with the originals until '71. When they split up. So they were together 5 years. They put out 4 or 5 great albums. The first two, the second one was coming along, got more into that trippy rock vein.
Yeah.
By the time they got to the third album, Surrealistic, they were there. That really broke through the curtain for them.
Yeah.
And then the next two, Crown of Creation and Volunteers, better recordings, better engineering.
They had more money to work with.
Not necessarily better tunes.
Yeah, they had more money to work with at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
They sounded great still, and you could tell that they were evolving. And we mentioned this in the earlier time we did this.
Yeah.
They were political.
Yeah. I mean,
they got very political.
I mean, Uncle Sam Blues, Volunteers. Yeah, and I heard a lot of their songs, even modern day, people use like as protest songs. Even back in the day, people would, protest with these songs. But they were very political, from what I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. As a 16-year-old, hearing these tunes for the first time, of course, it was mind-opening. Is probably a good way to put it. Even for somebody so young as me, just playing drums for 3-4 years to that point.
Yeah.
4.
I mean, in an earlier episode, we were also talking about just the politics of the whole Woodstock event and getting it put together. I mean, so much to the effect that what it took, they found like 3 different locations. The third one finally stuck, and then they were like, a lot of the city officials were like, we don't want these hippie kids coming to our town. 50 years later, they're for political reasons trying to legalize drug use.
Right, and they were so late on stage on Sunday, early Sunday. The sun was fully up.
Yeah,
I'll never forget. The sun was completely up. Monday morning, maniac morning music. However she said it.
Yeah,
and it was the next day, and they're ending Saturday.
And this is after all the rain and the mud, right, Vince?
No, that was. They had some rain, light rain, earlier. I think the day before, but not that really interrupted anything. That heavy downpour that came that Sunday afternoon that I was there.
Final day, wow.
Living through that was a mind trip. Just to think back of how we had to glop. Our shoes were just like group.
Like I said when we were discussing that documentary we were watching on it, 3 days that became a generation or whatever it was called. When that film started, I tell you, Vince, you described it perfectly there. I mean, that visual stuck with my in my head.
Yes, and on the original film that came out, after that, it starts with the song Woodstock from Long Time Gone, I think it is.
Okay.
It gives me the chills to think that of how the film unfolds. The first song coming through, not from live, from a recording, and it was just wonderful time to have been alive to have experienced.
Yeah.
It was the worst. So one of the worst.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You were talking about Jefferson Airplane had they weren't together all that long, but the legacy they left behind, very much like Creedence Clearwater we were talking about last time.
Right.
They were here and they went real fast, but man, their music too lives on to this day.
It's such a surprise when your favorite bands break up.
Yeah.
When the Beatles broke up, nobody could believe it.
Yeah.
And little by little, you just knew. And then the 27 Club in the early 70s with a lot of these people just...
Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin.
Biting the bullet, from drugs mostly.
Yeah. And
and
they even include Kurt Cobain, the singer from Nirvana, all those years later in that Club 27. Yeah. Very few.
Amy Winehouse as well.
Yeah. Wow.
So many.
And it's like like in the case of Creedence, like we were talking about, these guys, they started out as the best of friends, and two of the guys were brothers, and they all ended up hating each other. But again, it's just amazing sometimes when they got that feuding going on, that tension. It makes for beautiful music.
Well, that's true. You start off as friends, and then as long as you go through performing, you reach higher and higher. You start climbing and climbing, and the higher you climb, people are starting to push you from all different sides, and sometimes it gets bands in trouble.
Yeah, and just getting back to CCR for a minute. I once seen John Fogerty do this interview, and he's an interesting cat because who can deny, he's a super talented guy, but he's also got a huge ego. I mean, I heard in this one interview he was talking about, people refer to those as Creedence songs. No, those are John Fogerty songs. I wrote those songs. The other guys weren't involved in the writing. But again, like we were talking, I personally believe, even as a music fan, every the drummer brings something, the bass player brings something to the song, and then he was even talking about, I taught all those guys how to play their instruments, and we were talking about how his older brother Tom, they had these guys before there was ever a Creedence Clearwater revival. They appeared on some of his early solo work recordings, and he was like, well, Tom was the world's greatest guitar player, but I taught him how to play guitar. I'm like, okay, but it's interesting when you get to the nitty gritty of some of these bands and why they fell apart.
You really sometimes it comes down to money. Songwriters make the most money.
Of course, that's what it's all about.
If you're writing your originals and you're performing on your originals, well, you get a cut as a performer, but you get a much bigger chunk by writing the songs. With songwriters. So it happens.
It happens. That's why they call it the music business, huh?
That's right. Boy, do you get the business sometimes in that business.
That might be a very good reason to do what you did and kind of go the tribute route where you're making a living by being a professional musician, playing other people's music. But I like to call it I think I told you, Vince, rock and roll theater, if you will. But you don't have to worry about that playing in a tribute band. Splitting the royalties or anything like that, or who gets more of the royalties than the other guy.
Well, this is true, and what we do is theater. It really is theater, is because with our tribute and many of the tributes that are recreating famous bands, you're doing characters as well as just doing the music.
Oh yeah.
So, but the Airplane, that whole Woodstock thing, that whole vibe that happened for those few days. Who knew it was going to become what it became? If you remember, they went on stage somewhere around 6:30 or 7 in the morning.
Wow!
It was and it was full sunshine. From what I remember hearing interviewed, they were all loopy from being up. That whole time, everybody was just like their heads were on fire from not getting sleep.
Wow!
And then. They did their best, though. I think that I recall a good, solid 45 minutes. Besides the interruption of the fight from the Hells Angels, very first song. At the end of the very first song.
Again, and you're looking back on this 50 years after the fact. I realize, but were you surprised when you were in the audience? Because I would think, even not having been there. But just kind of as my life experience going to different concerts, I would kind of thought they would have maybe played "Somebody to Love" like as a very last, encore or very last song in the set. Were you surprised they played it so early in the set?
No, that none of that mattered
Back then. Okay, cool.
But when they burst into a song like that, just to hear it,
the roar of the crowd
gives you joy. Like now, bands through the years, they learn how to craft
their set list. Yeah, very much.
This was more like, let's get up there, let's play. Here's the set list.
Yeah.
They jotted down the songs. I don't know if there was a rhyme of reason of going one song into the next, but to hear the 4 or 5 that I knew from Surrealistic was just a thrill to hear the stuff live. I mean,
because there's a certain art list to creating a set list. I mean, more so these days, but like I've been to concerts where, I'm there and I've seen half the show and I haven't even heard one of the songs that I came to see or that I'm even aware of. Some of the bands, depending on who you go see, they'll play some of the deeper cuts. Fans like that, but so it's a real art to creating a set list, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Through the almost 12 years that Mick and I have been doing this together, we learned to craft the set list in chunks of 2 or 3 songs where certain things naturally feel good to follow certain things, opening up with 1 or 2 of the big hits and then ending up with the real big hits at the end. And for them, they had so many that there's like nary a letdown in a set list unless you choose to do something that nobody's that familiar with, but it's a good deep cut.
Now you take the Rolling Stones. They've been doing it at least 50 years. I mean, the average age of the band members has got to be at least 70, 75, and they're still rocking on the stage. They're still putting out new music. So, do you guys ever kind of take a giant, huge leap and maybe play one of the newer tunes off of newer albums, as opposed to just sticking to all the hits?
It was just a year ago. January.
Wow.
A year and a half ago. Okay. Yeah. So just before that, the Marvel movie came out, the Infinity.
Yeah. Okay.
The last big movie. Yeah. In it featured the song "Doom and Gloom."
Oh wow!
So we learned "Doom and Gloom," and we've played it a bunch of times. Love that song. It rocks. It motors on. So yes. We've done a lot newer stuff, and of course all the old stuff. Oh
yeah, of course. You can't have a Rolling Stones tribute without playing "Honky Tonk Woman" or "Satisfaction."
Right. Yeah. And what you need to do is when you're doing something that's that deep or that new and people don't know, you have to give it just a brief explanation.
Why we're doing this?
This one comes off of this album, or this is a brand new song that they just released. It's in the movie, and then you win people over.
Yeah, because
educate them a little.
That's a cool thing about going to see a tribute act is like, again, I call this rock and roll theater, as you say, because especially go see bands like you guys that dress the part and are not just up there in your jeans and t-shirts. You're putting on a show for the people, and it makes it that much funner. Where if maybe the band you're paying tribute has put a new album, hey, we'll do a little something different. I'll throw this into the set, see what you guys think. And also, like I said. If you guys go see Mick Adams and the Stones, for example, not only do they do a great job of recreating the Rolling Stones who they're paying tribute to, but they might take you. They might be so good that they take you back. Vince may be such a good caricature of Charlie Watts that he might convince you that that's Charlie Watts sitting right before your eyes. I've
had that happen to me. Some people say that.
I think even Mick shared with me that there's been a few occasions where people thought he was really Mick Jagger playing in a little tiny club, and no, come on, man, you're Mick Jagger. Come on, sign this. Okay.
I've got stories for you from all of the times from hanging out, going in Vegas, and the ladies with our wives in the restroom, ladies going in, us standing in the hallway. Oh, it's Mick Jagger, it's Mick Jagger.
And there are tribute acts like you guys that are so good that I know when I've been to some of these shows, it takes me back to the first time, for example. That I ever heard a Guns N' Roses tune or I heard a Rolling Stones tune in this case, let's say, on the radio for the very first time. I'm like, man, that takes me back, that brings back memories.
Really? It's too bad that they didn't do Woodstock, that the Beatles that didn't do it. That would have been the coup d'etat for those guys to get. But both of those bands, they were like no to the Stones, and the Beatles said no.
Yeah, the Beatles turned it down too, and it's interesting because a lot of these great bands we're talking about from that time, I got the Beatles #1 album the other day just because I like a lot of the songs on there, and I want to get a CD to listen to. But anyway, so what's interesting about that album is it does have a lot of their big hits, but the reason they call it the #1s is apparently the Beatles had 27 #1 songs. So just think about that for a minute,
Really?
Even in their short career, to have, for any band to have 27 #1 hits, that's some talent right there.
Now, if I recall, doesn't that album have that song that they released from John Freeze a Bird? Does that have that on there? I can't remember.
No, I don't think it does, but I think it has a ballad of John and Yoko.
Yoko, right.
That might be what you're thinking of. I'm not sure.
Well, Ballad of John and Yoko came on one of their last albums.
Few albums, yeah, obviously.
Yeah. I remember. Well, very last album. I just can't remember everything. Yeah. Everything gets jumbled up. Yeah, but it was a great time to have been alive to experience that in the flesh.
And talking about Jefferson Airplane, before we wrap this up, Vince, I got to ask you, how big of a drummer, you mentioned Spencer, was he on your plane?
Oh, Spencer Dryden?
Yeah.
Solid drummer, but, it was more about the names. Spencer was a guy that was just in a band that gave them a solid backing. Wow. And in fact, the way he did it, he played more surrealistic.
Yeah, there you go.
Shall we say?
Yeah.
On a lot of their tunes, he would turn beats around and do weird things. You kind of go, "What did he just play?"
Yeah.
But he wasn't a Ginger Baker.
Okay,
he wasn't a Keith Moon. He wasn't a Charlie or Ringo. He wasn't in that category at all. And later on, he was just one of the guys in the band who made the band.
Yeah.
His style of playing made that band.
And I've talked to you now several times, Vince, and one name that you constantly bring up is Cream and Ginger Baker. I'm assuming he was a huge influence on you as far as your drum playing.
Very much so. Very much. All the guys that I mentioned, also Cosmo from Creedence Clearwater. All these guys, it's funny, as a musician, when you're growing up and you're learning, okay, because these are formative years, of course.
Yeah, of course.
You pick up something from everyone.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not a personal friend of Liberty DeVito's from Billy Joel's band, but I have stolen a lot from him and was able to tell him online through Facebook, hey, I've stolen from you.
Well, that's just a case of wearing your influences on your sleeves, so to speak.
Really, and so many drummers that you borrow a piece here and a piece there, and that's what makes you you.
And it's interesting. I mean, as far as music goes, as a musician yourself, Vince, I'm sure you know this, but I've read there's only so many notes of music. It's very you take a band like we were talking about last time, Creedence Clearwater. They got sued by a record company of Little Richard because their song "Traveling Band" sounded too much like Good Golly Miss Molly, and and Little Richard actually won that, or his record company rather won the lawsuit. But there's just so many notes I guess you could play.
That's right, and then everything gets recycled. If you think about how everything before it influences you, and the thing before that influences that person, the thing before that influenced that person.
I mean, you go all the way back to Elvis Presley, and and he was influenced by everything from gospel to country to rock.
That's right. And I'm going to mention the name of one other drummer before we go. A guy who had a bigger influence than me, who I got a chance to communicate with just up to a couple of years ago when he passed.
Wow.
And his name is Hal Blaine. Hal Blaine is the most famous, non-famous drummer you have ever heard.
Wow, I got to look that up.
He was part of a band called the Wrecking Crew, who was a group of session people from Los Angeles.
Okay.
So about 30 guys that they would use. They would go and do 3 or 4 different sessions every single day.
Wow.
They played on everything from the Beach Boys, the Association, the
Wow.
Monkees, Mamas and the Papas, and I can't tell you how many more.
Wow.
So he was on literally one of the guys who has been on the most records ever.
Wow, that's
Hal Blaine.
Hal Blaine.
So you don't know how much you get influenced. All of those.
Well, even
bands,
I've even heard Jimmy Page before anybody knew who he was in the Yardbirds or Led Zeppelin. That's what he did. He was a session guy, and they were saying you'd be amazed how many sessions you can find Jimmy Page on, for example.
Absolutely, and in fact, did you know he's on that newer released, which is a really old Stones song on the new release of Goat's Head Soup coming up.
Wow.
They just released a song, I can't remember the title of it, with him playing on it, Jimmy Page.
Oh wow. Now before we started doing the latest episode today, Vince, I was sharing with you that if people are interested, they can go to www.woodstock.com, and this is the official site for Woodstock, I guess. They've got great news articles and things on the bands that played there. You can go and find each of the band's set list for the day at Woodstock. But what piqued my interest today was in the news section. If you go to, there's a section on there called 1969, and I think they also got a news section. But anyways, there's an article on there about the fact that Jefferson Starship, which is kind of what Jefferson Airplane kind of morphed into, and they've got a new album coming out. And there's a song called "It's About Time" that they found that apparently was originally written by Grace Slick. So if you're at all either a fan of Jefferson Starship or Jefferson Airplane, that's something you might want to check out.
I will definitely check that out.
And final question for the day, Vince. Obviously, you were a big fan of this band prior to Woodstock, but I was curious. Was Woodstock the first time you saw the band live, or had you seen them before?
No, only time.
Only time? That is amazing. Wow.
And remember, they were a San Francisco band, and I was a Long Islander, and I was still just cutting teeth getting out into the world to see other concerts.
Wow.
So to have gone with all of my friends who are still my friends, and to see some of these legends.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting to learn about, Vince, because a lot of times, after you discover a band, you go see them more than one time. But it's kind of interesting that this was the first and only time you saw Jefferson Airplane, and they became such a huge part of your life as far as your influences. That one performance made such a huge impression on you, turning you on to this great band. And it's kind of interesting. That's the only time you ever saw them. And Woodstock itself has become, 50 years later we're talking about it, and to this day it's such a historical event.
Yeah, when you come from the era that I came from, and I wasn't drinking or doing any sort of drugs at all, so I have good memories, clear memories, not of everything, but of the general ambiance and how things sounded, how people acted and behaved, and just being there in the moment. I wanted to soak that up and be in that moment.
Well, we're in that moment right now. I wasn't even alive, but I feel like I'm there with you. And and before we wrap this up, one final thing I do want to ask about in regards to Surrealistic Pillow. There's another song on here that I was listening to. Maybe you can shed some light on this. The title is DCBA 25. I'm not. Any idea what that song's about or what that stands for?
Nope.
Okay, yeah.
In a word? No.
Yeah. Okay.
But I take the album from beginning to end as a piece of art that they were creating something in no time for a little amount of money, and it really broke through them to be international stars.
Yeah, and again, before we wrap this up, I just got to thank you, Vince, for coming up with the idea to do this, Remembering Woodstock, and it's kind of morphed into, we're doing more than one episode. Originally it was supposed to just be one more episode, but there's so much to talk about. We've just scratched the surface, but what I really want to thank you for in regards to Jefferson Airplane is, like so many people, because I was not even alive back in 1969. Probably when I think of Jefferson Airplane, like many people, Somebody to Love's the song that comes to mind. So thanks for turning me on to this album, because I got really turned on to some great music that I wasn't even aware of it, and that's always a great thing.
My pleasure. And I guess that's why I'm here.
Yeah, thanks, my brother. So I'll check with you next week, and we'll set up for when we're going to do the next episode. But thanks for being part of this. It's been really great getting to know you. Jason,
I can't wait for the day that we can meet in the flesh.
Oh, well, we will definitely do that one day. Thanks so much, Vince, and take care.
You're very welcome. Thank you. This is fun.
Yeah, it definitely is. Bye-bye.